The member for Fadden.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Minister, with respect to the ASPI's detailed book in terms of defence budget and the white paper, as you're aware, ASPI's concluded the federal government has a $33 billion shortfall in its funding for the 2013 white paper. It quotes absolute term funding remains well below what was promised back in 2009, yet plans for the ADF remain as ambitious as ever, end quote. ASPI also reports, and again I'll quote, consistent with this, the share of GDP will remain below 1.7% for the next decade, end quote. Minister, how exactly does your government expect to afford the equipment procurement set out in the white paper when the budget is continuing to be cut? And also, ASPI has belled the cat in terms of, will you now confirm that your goal of returning defence spending to 2% of GDP really is rhetorical, and it's clear from ASPI's analysis at best that you'll only seek to reach 1.7% of GDP over the next 10 years?
The Minister.
Thank you. Look, I'm aware of the ASPI report, and whilst I appreciate the diligence to which the ASPI team have gone about their work, I'm afraid we don't agree with their outcomes. Isn't that a surprise to you? But I do want to make the observation, and I want to thank the opposition for effectively sharing the same policy towards defence budgets, and for that I thank you. And I know that we share a commitment to ensure that we develop the defence capability as we've decided to do. But let me just make some observations about the calculation of the $33 billion shortfall, which assumes a 3% growth in defence budget from 2008-9 to 2017-18 and a 2.2% real growth beyond. Unfortunately, this fails to take into account that when the new funding model for defence was announced in the 2009-10 white paper, there were deferrals and reprogramming of funding in the early years that were publicly announced in the 2009-2010 budget. Additionally, the 3% growth commitment was never a 3% constant annual growth, but rather an average growth rate over a longer period of time. In 2010-11, 2011-12 and 2012-13 budgets, there were expenditure reductions applied to the defence budget totalling $8.9 billion over the period 2010-11 to 2020-21, as detailed in Defence's portfolio budget statements. I also just refer further about whether or not the defence budget has been cut over the decade. The white paper announced that the government had decided the defence funding model would be based on the 4-year forward estimates budget, a cycle determined on an annual basis, taking into account contemporary strategic, economic and fiscal circumstances. And that, I think, is surely understood by everyone. This aligns defence funding with the Commonwealth's broader budget process. It provides certainty for planning in the short term, but recognises the difficulty in forecasting fiscal circumstances in the longer term, which, as we know, is an art which is not perfect. The defence budget for 2013-14 is $25.3 billion. This, as we also know, is $1.1 billion higher than the 2012-13 budget of $24.2. This will grow to $30.7 billion by 2016-17. The government will provide defence $113 billion across the budget and forward estimates. This compares to $103 billion in 2012-13 budget and forward estimates, or a $10 billion increase over the 4-year period. In dollar terms, this is more than has ever been spent before on defence, and that, I'm sure, is well appreciated.
Every budget spends more on everything.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
Well,
no.
This is not a discussion between the two benches opposite each other.
It could be.
Everything is through the chair.
We could just have a... I'm sorry.
Well, you could, but I won't allow it, so you'll direct all your questions and answers through the chair.
You're a hard bugger. But let me just say I appreciate the way in which the Opposition Shadow Minister is carrying himself, and I don't particularly mind his interjections. but through the chair, absolutely. The government, as we said, we've spent more than ever before. The government will also provide Defence with 6 years beyond the forward estimates of general guidance for planning purposes. And this obviously concedes that attempting to provide tens of, I don't know what we're doing, people are escaping, years of funding with precision is extremely difficult given the volatility in the world economy and government revenue forecasts. This budget, the government will provide defence guidance of over $220 billion. Together, these amount to approximately $333 billion. So we're obviously committed, as you well know, to increasing the defence budget funding towards a target of 2% of GDP as and when fiscal circumstances allow, and I think that's broadly consistent with the view of the opposition. It's a long-term objective that will be implemented in an economically responsible way as and when fiscal circumstances allow.
The member for Fadden.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Minister has taken spinning to a twirling dervish level, can I just say. The Minister, despite the eloquent words, there is no escaping $25 billion in cumulative cuts over the defence budget over the last 5 years, and there is no escaping cuts as a proportion of GDP where defence expenditure is the lowest level since 1938. No level of fiscal means and new budget process can escape that. Can I draw your attention, sir, to the the white paper and the resultant budget documents that look at the purchase of the 12 EA-18G growlers. The cost of acquiring the growler, as per the white paper and the budget documents, is $2.974 billion. Yet the budget paper makes it very clear that the only allocation of funds for that is $200 million in 2014. The budget 14-15. The budget also makes it expressly clear, Minister, that the remainder, $2.774 billion, is to be met from within Defence's existing resources, with outlays out to 2012-2022. I think it's page 188, 288, page 288 for your staff rapidly searching their documents behind. Existing resources. That is an absorption, Minister, of $2.774 billion. Now, in your world, absorption is just one of those economic terms. Where I come from, absorption is a cut. Because if you have to absorb $2.77 billion, you have to cut something else, because that's the way you absorb something. So, Minister, where will those cuts come from to allow the absorption of $2.774 billion for growler?
The Minister.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Look, I'm just surprised at the cynicism. I do. I mean, and even the sarcasm at times. To think that we would not but do the responsible thing. And in terms of the growler, as announced as part of the 2013 White Paper, the government, as you well know, has decided to acquire the 12 new-build EA-18G Growler electronic attack aircraft instead of, and I think this is far more preferable in any event, instead of converting 12 of Australia's existing FA-18F Super Hornet aircraft into the Growler configuration. These 12 Growler aircraft will enhance significantly, as I'm sure you'll agree, the ADF's electronic warfare capability, and together with the JSF and the Super Hornet will form a formidable air combat force capable of controlling both air and electronic environments. And I think it's important that we really appreciate what we're getting here in terms of capability. These additional 12 aircraft will cost approximately $2.9 billion. Now, just for the Shadow Minister's information, offsetting this cost is the $1.5 billion already committed in the Defence Capability Program to convert 12 of Australia's existing FA-18F Super Hornet aircraft into the Growler configuration, which will no longer go ahead. So there's a saving which will be redirected towards the acquisition of the Growler. The government will also provide Defence with an additional $200 million towards this purchase in 2014-15. The remaining funding will be found through adjustments to the priority activities across defence, which you alluded to, including proposed capability acquisitions. As I'm sure you know and would appreciate, that in terms of the way in which we estimate the cost of these things and then ultimately fund them, the details will be provided in the next Public Defence Capability Plan, which will be published. The detail will be there, my friend. Just don't be so... Don't be... Mr Deputy Speaker, he's a very, very cynical person. Next Public Defence Capability, which will be published before the end of the 2012-13 financial year. Now, I can assure the Shadow Minister opposite that we really understand the financial costs of doing this business and managing the costs within the budgetary framework that we've set for defence.
The member for Fadden.
For the sake of actually putting a senatorial hat on and seeking a supplementary in the same space, Minister, in answering the question, where will the extra $2.77 billion come from that has to be absorbed, you indicated that $1.5 billion will be redirected from the DCP, which was going to be used for conversion, and the rest will all just have to wait and see and trust the government, which frankly is hilarious considering the $25 billion worth of cuts. But let's just park that one side. The $1.5 billion in the DCP that was previously committed for the conversion, which you're now looking to redirect, was never actually committed in real terms, but was always to be absorbed within the DCP. It was never actually committed. Minister, can you point to me exactly where that $1.5 billion was committed?
Well,
The Minister.
look, with great respect to my friend in the opposition, the figures are provided for in the defence budget. I mean, it's clear. So I'm not sure what the problem is here. The money's been identified, it's there, and it will be allocated for this purpose.
The member for Fadden.
If I could redirect again, Minister, the money is not allocated. The $1.5 billion you're referring to from the previous announcement for the conversion of Super Hornets into Growlers, that $1.5 billion, when you announced it, was announced as an absorption. So you have just said to the House that that $1.5 billion absorption will be redirected to meet the current absorption. Absorption plus absorption still equals absorption, Minister, unless you can find some other way to find $1.5 billion.